There are moments in life that act as prisms, moments that you can hold up to the light and see every preceding year refracted within them, every color of doubt, love, and suspicion separated into its purest form. For me, that prism was a crystal flute of champagne held in my slightly trembling hand in a gilded ballroom on a perfect June evening. Through its distorting curve, I watched my son Robert spin his wife, Clarissa, on the dance floor. To the world, they were a portrait of happiness. To me, with the cold weight of knowledge settling in my gut, they were a masterpiece of deception, and I was about to become its unwilling curator. My son Robert is my only child, the quiet, steady echo of his late father Charles. At 45, he still has that boyish earnestness that makes you want to protect him from the world, even when he's a successful architect who builds skyscrapers. He loves with his whole heart, a trait I've always admired and feared in equal measure. His heart is an open house with the doors unlocked, and for the last 12 years, Clarissa had been its sole, and I suspected, self-serving resident. His daughter, my granddaughter Lily, is 10. She is the continuation of all that is good in our family, Charles's quiet humor, Robert's kindness, and if I may say so, my own resilience. She is the reason my world still spins on its axis. Clarissa came into our lives like a sudden squall on a calm sea. She was 42, striking in a way that seemed assembled by a committee of magazine editors, all sharp angles and expensive fabrics. She worked in art curation, a profession that suited her perfectly as she seemed to view people, my son included, as objects to be acquired and positioned for maximum effect. From the beginning, my intuition, a sense honed by nearly 8 decades of life, hummed with a low, persistent warning whenever she was near. It wasn't one single event, but a collection of small, almost imperceptible moments that, when stitched together, formed a tapestry of her true nature. I recall one of the first Christmases after they were married. I had given Clarissa a cashmere scarf, a beautiful, soft gray I had chosen myself. She'd unwrapped it, smiled a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and said, "Oh, Margaret, how thoughtful, it will be perfect for when I'm walking the dog." They did not own a dog, the scarf was never seen again. Instead, a week later, she was wearing a nearly identical one in a bolder, more fashionable shade of crimson, which she proudly announced she had exchanged for something a little more me. She saw no issue with it. It was simply a matter of upgrading, of optimizing the asset. My gift, and by extension my sentiment, was merely a starting point for her own desires. Robert, ever the peacemaker, had just squeezed my arm and said, "That's Clarissa for you, Mom. She knows what she likes." Then there was the matter of family history. My late husband, Charles, had been an avid collector of antique maps. His study, which I had kept exactly as he'd left it, was his sanctuary. The walls were lined with them, each one a story of a world gone by. Shortly after Lily was born, Clarissa began a campaign to modernize the house. "Margaret, darling," she'd said, gliding a hand over a 17th century map of the North American colonies, "this room has such wonderful light. Imagine it with clean, white walls. We could sell these old papers to a collector. Think of the fund we could start for Lily's education." She spoke of it as if she were clearing out a dusty attic, not dismantling a man's soul. She saw not the history, not the love, not the legacy I was trying to preserve for my son and granddaughter, but a monetary value, an asset to be liquidated. I had refused, politely but firmly. My refusal created a subtle but palpable chill between us that never truly thawed. She could not comprehend why sentiment would take precedence over profit. The most telling incident, however, happened about a year before that fateful wedding. It was Lily's 9th birthday. My granddaughter had her heart set on a specific type of bicycle, a simple, retro-style cruiser she had seen in a local shop. I had offered to buy it for her, a grandmother's privilege, but Clarissa intervened. "No, no," she'd insisted, "Lily needs to understand branding." She then spent a small fortune on a complicated, professional-grade mountain bike with 21 gears and logos plastered all over it. Lily was overwhelmed by it. She couldn't manage the gears and was intimidated by its aggressive look. The expensive bike gathered dust in the garage while Lily still looked longingly at the cruisers in the park. Clarissa hadn't bought a gift for Lily, she had bought a status symbol for herself. She was parenting for an imaginary audience, curating a life rather than living one. Robert, bless his heart, saw it as Clarissa wanting the best for their daughter. I saw it as Clarissa wanting everyone to see that she provided the best. The distinction was critical, and it was a distinction my son was willfully blind to. So as I stood at my cousin's daughter's wedding, watching Clarissa laugh and press herself against my son, I was not an unsuspecting matriarch. I was a sentry, one who had been watching the horizon for years, knowing a storm was coming. I just never imagined I would be the one to witness the first devastating strike of lightning. The wedding was held at a sprawling country estate, the kind of place with more history in its stone walls than my entire family tree. Manicured gardens flowed into wilder groves of ancient oaks, and a grand ballroom spilled golden light onto a stone terrace overlooking a placid lake. It was a fairy tale setting, designed to convince you that love was simple and happily ever after was a foregone conclusion. What a lie. I had spent most of the evening seated at the main family table, making pleasant conversation and watching Lily, who was a junior bridesmaid. She looked like a little woodland sprite in her pale green dress, her face alight with the magic of the evening. Robert was the perfect father, occasionally leaving the dance floor to bring Lily a glass of lemonade or to twirl her around, her giggles echoing in the cavernous room. Clarissa, meanwhile, held court. She moved through the crowd with a practiced grace, her laughter a little too loud, her hand touching an arm a little too long. She was performing. As the night wore on and the band shifted from sentimental ballads to more energetic rhythms, I found the air in the ballroom growing thick and cloying. The scent of wilting roses and spilled champagne was beginning to give me a headache. Excusing myself, I pushed open one of the heavy French doors and stepped out onto the terrace. The cool night air was a welcome relief. The terrace was mostly deserted, save for a few smokers huddled at the far end. I walked towards the stone balustrade, my hand trailing along its cool, moss-dusted surface. Below, a series of stone steps led down into a more secluded part of the garden, a small, formal knot garden illuminated by discreet, low-wattage lanterns. It was designed for quiet conversations, for stolen moments. And that's when I heard them. Two voices, low and intimate, carried on the still night air. A man's voice, rich with a familiar, confident cadence, and a woman's laugh, Clarissa's laugh. But it was different from the one she used in the ballroom. This one was softer, more genuine, and it sent a shiver down my spine. Curiosity, that powerful, often treacherous impulse, took hold. I moved silently to the top of the stairs, my soft-soled shoes making no sound on the flagstones. I positioned myself behind a large stone urn filled with overflowing ivy which provided perfect cover. I could see them now, partially obscured by a sculpted yew tree. Clarissa and a man I vaguely recognized. He was tall, with dark hair and the easy confidence of someone who has never been told no in his life. Then it clicked. Julian Vance, a name Clarissa had mentioned in passing years ago, an old friend from her university days who had, by sheer coincidence, moved back into the area recently, her ex-boyfriend. They were standing close, far too close for old friends. His hand was resting on the small of her back, his thumb tracing slow circles on the silk of her dress. "I can't believe you came," Clarissa whispered, her voice breathy. "You knew I would," Julian replied, his voice a low murmur. "I wouldn't miss a chance to see you in your natural habitat playing queen of the suburbs." There was a teasing cruelty in his tone, but Clarissa didn't seem to mind. She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder for a fleeting moment. "It's not so bad. Robert is stable, predictable." "Stable, predictable, and rich," Julian added, his voice laced with cynical amusement. "Don't forget that part, it's the part you were always most interested in." Clarissa pulled back slightly, a flicker of something, annoyance, guilt, crossing her face. "That's not fair, Julian, it wasn't like that." "Wasn't it?" he challenged, his fingers tightening on her back. "Come on, Rissa, we don't have to lie to each other. We never did. You wanted security. A big house, a doting husband, a perfect little girl. You got it. Congratulations, but don't pretend you don't miss this." He gestured between the two of them. "The fire." My own blood ran cold. This was not a chance encounter. This was a planned rendezvous. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to march down those stairs, to confront them, to shatter this sordid little scene. But I was frozen, held captive by the impending horror, like watching a car crash in slow motion. "It's not that simple," Clarissa said, her voice dropping. "There's Lily, and the prenup is ironclad. Charles Sterling made sure of that. His ghost is probably still auditing the household accounts. I flinched, as if she had struck me. She spoke of my late husband with such dismissive contempt. Julian laughed, a short, sharp sound. There are always ways, lawyers find them, especially when the aggrieved party is a loving wife who has been so loyal. The sarcasm was thick enough to taste. You just need a reason, make him the bad guy, make him want the divorce. A good lawyer could argue that your contribution to the marriage entitles you to far more than that piece of paper dictates. Especially with a child involved, you just have to play it smart. Clarissa was silent for a long moment. She looked up at him, her face illuminated by the soft garden light. The expression she wore was one I had never seen before. It was a raw, hungry look, a mixture of longing and cold calculation. "And what if I do?" she breathed. "What if I finally get what I'm owed? What happens with us?" "We'll see," Julian said, his voice dropping to a seductive whisper. He leaned in, and for a heart-stopping second, I thought he was going to kiss her. He stopped just short, his lips hovering inches from hers. "First things first, secure the exit package." And then he did kiss her. It wasn't a tentative, hesitant kiss. It was deep and possessive, a kiss of shared history and sordid secrets. Clarissa melted into him, her hands clutching at the lapels of his jacket. It was a complete and utter betrayal, not just of my son, but of the entire life she had so carefully constructed. The scene burned itself into my memory, a permanent scar on my soul. I didn't wait to see more. I pulled back from the urn, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I felt dizzy, nauseous. I turned and walked stiffly at first, then more quickly back across the terrace, through the now unbearably loud ballroom, not daring to look at my son, who was still smiling, oblivious. I found an attendant, mumbled something about a sudden migraine, and asked for my coat. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I couldn't. The words would have turned to ash in my mouth. I slipped out of the estate like a thief in the night, the fairy tale facade crumbling behind me into a pile of dust and deceit. I was no longer a guest at a wedding. I was a witness, and a quiet, cold fury was beginning to solidify around my broken heart. The drive home was a blur of headlights and shadows. My hands, usually so steady, were locked onto the steering wheel in a white-knuckled grip. The car, my familiar and comfortable sanctuary, felt like a cage. Every sound was magnified, the hum of the tires on the asphalt, the tick of the indicator, the soft rush of the air conditioning. Each one seemed to mock the roaring silence in my own head. My mind kept replaying the scene in the garden, the conspiratorial whispers, the contempt in Clarissa's voice when she spoke of Charles, Julian's predatory smile, the kiss. It played on a loop, each repetition sharpening the edges of the pain and the anger. This wasn't a simple, foolish mistake. It was a calculated plot. Secure the exit package. The words echoed in my mind, cold and venomous. She didn't see my son as a husband or a partner. She saw him as a bank to be robbed. She didn't see Lily as her daughter, but as a bargaining chip. When I finally pulled into my own driveway, I couldn't bring myself to get out of the car. I just sat there in the darkness, the engine ticking as it cooled. My house, usually a source of comfort and peace, seemed to loom over me, its familiar windows like vacant eyes. How could I go inside and pretend that the world was the same as it had been when I left just a few hours ago? A wave of profound loneliness washed over me. Charles was gone. Who could I talk to? Who would understand the sheer magnitude of this discovery? If I called Robert now in the middle of the wedding, what would I say? "Hello, dear, I hope you're having a lovely time. By the way, your wife is in the garden plotting your financial ruin with her ex-boyfriend." The thought was absurd, monstrous. He would be drunk on champagne and love, and my words would shatter him. He might not even believe me. He would see me as a meddling old woman, a mother-in-law fulfilling a bitter stereotype. Clarissa would deny everything, paint me as confused, senile even. She was a master manipulator. She would turn Robert against me in a heartbeat. No, I couldn't tell him, not yet. The knowledge was a poison, and for now I had to be its sole keeper. Finally, my legs stiff and unsteady, I made my way inside. I didn't turn on the lights. I walked through the dark, familiar rooms, my hand trailing along the furniture, each object a touchstone to a life that now felt like a fiction. I stopped in front of a framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It was from a family vacation a few years back. Robert, Clarissa, and a much younger Lily, all smiling on a sunny beach. Robert's arm was wrapped protectively around Clarissa's shoulders, his face a perfect picture of contentment. I looked at Clarissa's smile in the photo. It was the same smile she had worn all night in the ballroom, bright, polished, and utterly hollow, a performer's smile. I spent the rest of the night in my late husband's armchair, a thick quilt wrapped around me, though it did little to ward off the chill that had settled deep in my bones. Sleep was an impossibility. My mind was a whirlwind of rage, grief, and fear. Rage at Clarissa for her cold, mercenary heart, grief for my son for the pain that was inevitably coming his way, and a paralyzing fear for Lily, an innocent child who would be caught in the crossfire of this impending war. What was I to do? The question beat against my skull like a relentless drum. Part of me, the raw, wounded part, wanted to lash out, to expose Clarissa publicly, to watch her curated world burn to the ground. But what would that accomplish? It would create a hideous scandal. It would humiliate Robert, drag our family name through the mud, and traumatize Lily. It would be a messy, bloody battle, and Clarissa, cornered and desperate, would fight dirty. Julian's words came back to me, make him the bad guy. She would invent lies, twist the truth, and use Lily as her primary weapon. As the first pale light of dawn began to creep through the windows, filtering the darkness into shades of gray, a different feeling began to emerge from the chaos of my emotions. The hot, messy anger started to cool, crystallizing into something harder, sharper, and far more dangerous: resolve. I thought of Charles. He had been a man of quiet strength and meticulous planning. He never made a move in business or in life without considering every angle, every possible outcome. He would not have charged into this situation with righteous fury. He would have been calm, strategic. He would have gathered his facts, built his case, and then acted with devastating precision. Clarissa and Julian thought they were the smart ones, the predators. They saw Robert as a target and me as a fragile old woman, a relic from a bygone era to be placated with token gestures and dismissed. They had made a critical error. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my grace for weakness, my silence for acquiescence. I would not let Clarissa destroy my son. I would not let her use my granddaughter as a pawn in her greedy game. But I would not fight her on her terms with screaming matches and public accusations. I would fight her on mine. I would use the very qualities she disdained, my patience, my attention to detail, my deep, quiet love for my family, as my weapons. She wanted to play a game of chess. Fine, but I had been playing for a lot longer, and I knew the board better than she could ever imagine. My objective was no longer simply to expose her, it was to protect my family, to dismantle her plot so completely, so surgically, that by the time she realized what was happening, the game would already be over. Checkmate. My grief had not vanished, but it now had a purpose. My fear had not disappeared, but it was now fuel. I stood up from the armchair, the quilt falling to the floor. The sun was rising, casting long shadows across the room. The world was not the same, but for the first time since I'd left the wedding, I felt a flicker of strength. I knew what I had to do, and I knew who I had to call. Monday morning arrived with a cruel, sunlit normality that felt entirely at odds with the turmoil inside me. I went through the motions of my morning routine: tea, toast, reading the paper, but the words on the page were just black squiggles and the tea tasted of nothing. My mind was a fortress, and inside its walls I was assembling an army. At precisely 9 o'clock, when I knew he would be in his office and finished with his first cup of coffee, I picked up the phone. My hand was perfectly steady now. I dialed a number I knew by heart, one that had connected me to a source of wisdom and unwavering loyalty for over 50 years. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice, softened by age but still retaining its crisp, authoritative edge, answered. Arthur Pendleton. Arthur, I said, my voice calmer than I felt. It's Margaret Sterling. Maggie, what a pleasant surprise. To what do I owe the honor? Don't tell me you've finally decided to take my advice and sue that noisy neighbor of yours. Arthur's attempt at humor was a comforting balm. He was my late husband's best friend, his college roommate, and for 4 decades our family's lawyer. Now semi-retired, he handled only a few select clients, mostly old friends he couldn't bring himself to abandon. He was shrewd, impeccably discreet, and one of the few people on earth I trusted implicitly. I'm afraid it's more serious than that, Arthur, I said, cutting to the chase. There was no point in pleasantries. I need your help, your professional help. Can I come see you this morning? The humor in his voice vanished instantly, replaced by a focused concern. He knew. My tone, I was not a woman given to melodrama. Of course, Maggie, my door is always open. Is 11 o'clock all right? I'll be there, I said and hung up. Arthur's office was in a stately old brownstone downtown, the kind with creaking wood floors and the faint, pleasant smell of old books and leather. He greeted me at the door himself, his tall, slightly stooped frame filling the doorway. His hair was a shock of white, but his eyes, behind a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles, were as sharp and perceptive as ever. He led me into his study, a room lined floor to ceiling with law books, and gestured for me to sit in one of the deep leather armchairs opposite his large mahogany desk. He didn't rush me. He poured 2 glasses of water, sat down, and simply waited, his hands clasped on top of his desk, his gaze patient and kind. Something has happened, Arthur, I began, my voice low, and then I told him everything. I recounted the scene at the wedding in meticulous detail, leaving nothing out. The setting, the whispers, Clarissa's contempt for Charles, Julian's cynical guidance, and the final, chilling phrase, "Secure the exit package." As I spoke, Arthur's expression shifted from concerned curiosity to a grim, focused intensity. He didn't interrupt. He listened, his eyes never leaving my face, absorbing every word. When I finished, the silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the distant sound of city traffic. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long, slow breath. "The little viper," he said, his voice a low growl. "I never trusted her. Charles never did either. He thought she was brittle, all surface, no substance." Hearing him say it, confirming the very instincts Charles and I had shared, was a profound relief. I wasn't a paranoid old woman. I wasn't imagining things. Charles was right, I said, my voice thick with emotion. But Robert sees what he wants to see. "Love is a powerful anesthetic," Arthur said grimly. "And Robert is a good man who assumes the best in people. It's his finest quality and his greatest vulnerability." He leaned forward again, his focus absolute. "So the question is, what do we do? A direct confrontation is out. It becomes a he said, she said situation, and she will shred you, Maggie. She'll call you a confused, jealous mother-in-law. She'll manipulate Robert, use Lily. We can't let that happen." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm here. I won't let this turn into a public spectacle. I won't let her drag Robert and Lily through the mud. This needs to be handled quietly, surgically." A slow smile spread across Arthur's face, though it held no humor. It was a smile of appreciation, of a fellow strategist recognizing a kindred spirit. "Surgically," he repeated, savoring the word. "I like that, no messy emotions, just cold, hard facts. You don't want to win an argument, Maggie. You want to win the war before the other side even knows it's been declared." "Exactly," I affirmed, feeling a surge of strength. I was not alone in this anymore. "All right," he said, his demeanor shifting into professional mode. He pulled a yellow legal pad and a pen from a drawer. "First things first, the prenup, you said she called it ironclad. She's right, Charles and I drafted it together, it's a fortress. It stipulates that in the event of a divorce, she is entitled to a one-time lump sum payment, adjusted for inflation and 5 years of alimony. Substantial, but a mere fraction of Robert's total net worth and completely separate from any inherited sterling assets. She gets nothing from what Charles and I built. Nothing." "She knows that," I said. "Her plan, the one she was discussing with Julian, is to find a way around it. To make Robert the bad guy, to claim she's the aggrieved party and that her contribution entitles her to more." "The marital contribution argument," Arthur nodded. "It's a common tactic. It rarely works against a prenup this strong, but a messy, protracted legal battle could pressure Robert into settling for a higher amount just to make it go away, especially with a child involved. That's her leverage, the threat of a public, painful fight. So we have to take that leverage away from her," I concluded. "Precisely," Arthur said, tapping his pen on the pad. "We need to build a case against her that is so absolute, so irrefutable, that fighting it would be an act of self-immolation. We need to show that she, not Robert, is the one who has acted in bad faith, that she has been deceitful not just romantically, but financially." He looked at me over the top of his glasses. "This is where it gets difficult, Maggie. We need more than just your testimony about the conversation in the garden. We need proof, hard proof. Financial records, communications, evidence of the affair. We need to show a pattern of deception. How do we get that? I asked, my heart sinking slightly. It sounded like an impossible task. Discreetly, Arthur said, glint in his eye. I have a man I use for sensitive inquiries, a private investigator, former police detective, smart, quiet as a mouse. He can look into Julian Vance for a start, see what their connection really is. We can also do a deep dive into Clarissa's finances. You mentioned she's in charge of the household accounts. I nodded. Robert trusts her completely with their day-to-day finances. He says he's terrible with it. Convenient, Arthur muttered, scribbling a note. We'll need to get access to those records. It might require a forensic accountant. We'll be looking for hidden credit cards, unusual expenditures, transfers to accounts Robert doesn't know about. We're not just looking for evidence of an affair, we're looking for evidence of a conspiracy to defraud. He looked up at me, his expression serious. This will take time, Maggie, weeks, maybe months, and during that time you have to do the hardest thing of all. What's that? Nothing, he said. You have to act as if everything is perfectly normal. You have to attend family dinners. You have to talk to Clarissa on the phone. You have to smile and pretend you don't know that she's a viper you're allowing to live in your house. Can you do that? I thought of Robert's trusting face, of Lily's innocent laughter. The image solidified my resolve into something unbreakable. I met Arthur's gaze without flinching. Arthur, I said, my voice as firm as steel, I can do whatever it takes. The weeks that followed were the most difficult of my life. I was living a dual existence. On the surface, I was Margaret Sterling, doting grandmother and matriarch, going about my quiet, orderly life. I had Sunday dinners with Robert and his family. I took Lily to the museum. I even endured a torturous afternoon of shopping with Clarissa, who wanted my classic eye on a new set of dining chairs. Every smile I gave her felt like a betrayal of my own integrity. Every polite inquiry about her week felt like a lie. I was an actress in the most agonizing role of my career, and the stage was my own family. Beneath this placid surface, a secret war was being waged. Arthur was my general, and I was his second in command. Our weekly meetings in his dusty, book-lined office were my only respite, the only moments I could let the mask slip. Arthur had hired the private investigator he'd mentioned, a man named Mr. Davies. He was as quiet and unobtrusive as promised. I never met him, but his reports, delivered to Arthur in plain manila envelopes, became the cornerstones of our case. The first report confirmed what I already knew. Julian Vance and Clarissa were meeting regularly. Davies had photographic evidence, grainy but undeniable pictures of them lunching at out-of-the-way cafes, entering a boutique hotel on a Tuesday afternoon, strolling through a park in a neighboring town. The affair was not a one-time indiscretion at a wedding. It was an ongoing, established relationship. Each photograph was a fresh stab to my heart, a renewed insult to my son. This is good, Arthur had said, laying the photos out on his desk like a grim set of playing cards. This establishes a pattern of infidelity. It eviscerates any claim she might have to being a wronged party. But we both knew we needed more. The affair was the emotional core of the betrayal, but the financial deception was the legal linchpin. Getting access to her records was the next and most challenging step. The solution, it turned out, came from an unexpected place: Robert himself. One evening during a phone call, he sounded flustered. "Mom, you're not going to believe this. Our credit card was declined. Clarissa was trying to buy a plane ticket for a girl's trip to Miami and it was just rejected. It's embarrassing. She's in a panic, thinks there's been some kind of fraud." A cold, electric thrill went through me. "Oh dear," I said, my voice a perfect imitation of grandmotherly concern. "That's awful. What are you going to do?" "Well, that's the thing," he said, sighing. "Clarissa handles all the bills online, she has all the passwords, and she's so upset she says she can't even think straight to log in and figure it out. I'm useless with this stuff, I wouldn't even know where to begin." An opportunity, a clean, perfect opening. I took a breath. Robert, darling, don't you worry. Why don't you have Clarissa call me? I can walk her through it on the phone. We can look at the statements together and see if there are any unusual charges. Two heads are better than one. It was a gamble. Would Clarissa's pride allow her to accept help from me? But her panic, it seemed, outweighed her pride. An hour later, she called, her voice tight with frustration. Margaret, Robert said you could help. I can't make sense of this. The bank's automated system is a nightmare. Of course, dear, I said soothingly. Just give me the login information and I'll pull it up on my computer here. You stay on the line and we'll solve this together. She hesitated for only a second before rattling off the username and password, the keys to the kingdom. As I typed them in, my heart hammered in my chest. I felt like a spy in a movie. The web page for their joint credit card account loaded. All right, I'm in, I said calmly. I quickly found the issue. A large purchase had put them over their credit limit. But as I scrolled through the statement, my breath caught in my throat. I saw what Clarissa hadn't wanted Robert to see. There were charges from high-end boutiques I knew Robert would never frequent, expensive lunches on weekdays when she was supposed to be at work, and most damningly, a recurring monthly charge listed under a generic corporate name, Vance Holdings, LLC. Julian's last name was Vance. I see the problem, dear, I said, my voice miraculously even. It seems a large charge from the furniture store came through and pushed you over the limit. A simple mistake. I'll make a payment from Robert's checking account right now to clear it up. I did as I promised, but not before taking screenshots of everything. I saved the entire statement as a PDF, capturing months of her secret spending. The charge from Vance Holdings, LLC was the smoking gun. Arthur's forensic accountant, a sharp woman named Ms. Albright, later traced it. It wasn't a holding company. It was the name of a shell corporation Julian Vance had set up, and the monthly payments were for the lease on a luxury apartment downtown, a love nest funded by my son. The web of deceit was more intricate than I could have imagined. Ms. Albright, with the information I had provided, dug deeper. She discovered a credit card in Clarissa's name only, a card Robert knew nothing about. The statements which she had been sending to a P.O. box were a catalog of her secret life. Expensive gifts for Julian. Airline tickets for weekend trips she had claimed were for work conferences. Lawyers' fees paid to a top divorce attorney for a consultation. We had it all. The affair, the financial malfeasance, the premeditated plot to orchestrate a lucrative divorce. We had a mountain of evidence so high and so solid that no lawyer on earth could tunnel through it. The process took nearly 2 months. 2 months of living a lie, of watching my son laugh with a woman who was bleeding him dry, of playing with my granddaughter in a home that was built on a foundation of secrets. The strain was immense. There were days I felt I would shatter from the pressure. But every time I looked at Lily, at her bright, trusting eyes, my resolve hardened. This was for her. This was for her future, a future free from the poison of her mother's greed. Finally, Arthur called me. Maggie, he said, his voice grim but satisfied. We're ready. We have an undeniable, comprehensive case. It's time to set the meeting. The end was in sight. There was no triumph in my heart, only a profound and weary sadness. The storm I had seen on the horizon was about to make landfall, and I was the one who had to call it in. I chose the setting for the final act with deliberate care. Not a lawyer's office, which would feel too adversarial from the start. Not my son's house, a place that was about to become a battleground. I chose my own home, the ancestral seat of the Sterling family, a place that represented legacy, stability, and truth. I chose my formal dining room, a room dominated by a long, imposing mahogany table that had hosted a century of family discussions, both joyous and solemn. I called Robert first. Darling, I said, my voice calm and measured. I've been meeting with Arthur to finalize some updates to my will and the estate plan. It's time you were fully briefed on the details. Could you and Clarissa come over for dinner on Thursday evening? Arthur will be joining us afterwards to walk us through the paperwork. Of course, Mom, Robert said without hesitation. Estate planning was a normal, if slightly morbid, part of life for a family like ours. He had no reason to be suspicious. I'll let Clarissa know we'll be there. Clarissa's agreement was my signal that she suspected nothing. If she had any inkling of what was coming, she would have manufactured a reason to be absent to avoid a direct meeting where she wasn't in control. But the lure of a discussion about the Sterling estate, a topic she was no doubt keenly interested in, was too great. Her own greed was leading her into the trap. On Thursday evening, I prepared a simple, elegant meal: roast chicken, potatoes, asparagus. The domesticity of the act was surreal. I felt like a general polishing his boots before a battle. When the doorbell rang, I took one last, deep breath and composed my features into a mask of placid hospitality. The dinner was an exercise in supreme self-control. Robert was in good spirits, talking about a new building project. Clarissa was charming, effusive, playing the role of the perfect daughter-in-law. She complimented the food, asked about my garden, and recounted a funny story about Lily. All the while, I could feel the evidence, neatly organized in a leather-bound portfolio by Arthur, sitting on the sideboard behind me like a dormant bomb. At 8 o'clock, the doorbell rang again. It was Arthur. I had asked him to arrive after the meal to maintain the pretense. He entered, carrying a briefcase, looking every bit the part of the family lawyer ready for a dry discussion of trusts and bequests. "Robert, Clarissa," he said, greeting them with a polite nod as I cleared the last of the plates. "Thank you for making the time for this." We all moved to the dining room table. I sat at the head, my traditional seat. I motioned for Robert to sit on my right and Clarissa on my left. Arthur sat opposite me, placing his briefcase on the table with a soft click. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The warmth of the dinner party evaporated, replaced by a formal tension. Arthur cleared his throat. "As Margaret mentioned, we're here to discuss the Sterling estate. But before we get into the future, we have a more pressing, present-day matter to address, a matter of the family's financial integrity." I saw a flicker of confusion in Robert's eyes. Clarissa, however, stiffened almost imperceptibly. Her smile became fixed. Arthur opened his briefcase but didn't take anything out yet. He looked directly at Clarissa. "Clarissa," he began, his voice devoid of all warmth, "we have become aware of certain financial and personal activities that represent a profound breach of trust to this family." I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, her eyes darting from Arthur to me then to Robert, searching for an ally. Robert looked bewildered. "Arthur, what is this? Mom, what's going on?" I looked at my son, my heart aching for the pain I was about to cause him. "Robert," I said softly, "just listen." Arthur reached into his briefcase and pulled out the portfolio. He opened it and slid the first set of documents across the gleaming mahogany surface towards Robert. "Let's start with this," he said. It was the credit card statement, the one I had downloaded from their account. I had highlighted the charges for the high-end boutiques, the lunches, and the damning line item, Vance Holdings, LLC. Robert stared at it, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Vance Holdings, what's that? Some kind of investment Clarissa made?" "Not exactly," Arthur said coldly. "Vance Holdings is a shell corporation registered to a Mr. Julian Vance. The monthly payments were for the lease on an apartment Clarissa has been frequenting." He then slid the photographs across the table, Clarissa and Julian lunching, walking, entering the hotel. Robert's face went slack with shock. He looked at the photos, then at Clarissa, his mouth slightly agape. The color drained from his face. "Clarissa, who is Julian Vance?" Clarissa's face was a mask of panic. "It's not what it looks like," she insisted, her voice rising. "He's just a friend, an old friend. This is ridiculous. Margaret, this is your doing, isn't it? You've always hated me, you're twisting things." I remained silent. I didn't need to speak. The evidence spoke for me. "A friend," Arthur continued, his voice like ice. "A friend for whom you purchased a $5,000 watch. A friend with whom you took a weekend trip to Napa, charged to a secret credit card your husband knew nothing about." He slid another set of papers over the statements from her secret card. Robert's eyes scanned the pages, his disbelief turning into dawning horror. He looked utterly broken, as if the foundations of his world were crumbling beneath him. "A secret credit card?" he whispered, looking at Clarissa. And a friend, Arthur added, delivering the final blow, whose name appears on the receipt for a consultation with a divorce attorney, an attorney known for breaking prenuptial agreements. He placed the lawyer's invoice on the top of the pile. That was it, the final piece. Clarissa stared at the pile of paper, at the architecture of her own deceit laid bare. The fight went out of her. Her face, which she had so carefully maintained, seemed to collapse. The mask was gone, and what was left was ugly and desperate. She turned to Robert, her voice now pleading. "Robert, baby, please. It was a mistake. I was confused. He manipulated me. It meant nothing. I love you. I love our family." But the words were hollow, meaningless against the mountain of evidence. Robert finally looked up from the papers, and the love and confusion in his eyes had been replaced by a look of profound, chilling clarity. He looked at the woman he had loved for 12 years as if seeing her for the very first time. "All this time," he said, his voice barely a whisper, yet it echoed in the silent room, "all this time you've been lying to me. It wasn't a question, it was a statement, an epitaph for their M. Outrage." He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the wood floor. He stood up, looked at me, his eyes filled with a world of pain, and then he walked out of the room without another word. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, then the sound of his bedroom door closing firmly. Clarissa was left alone at the table with me and Arthur. The silence was absolute. She was exposed, outmaneuvered, and utterly defeated. The war was over, and there were no victors, only casualties. In the echoing silence of the dining room, Clarissa stared at the space where Robert had been. Her desperation curdled into a bitter, venomous rage. Her eyes, stripped of their performative warmth, fixed on me. "You," she spat, her voice low and trembling. "You did this, you poisonous old woman. You were always jealous. You could never stand that he loved me." I met her gaze without flinching. My heart was a leaden weight in my chest, but my voice was steady. "No, Clarissa, you did this. You confused my son's love for weakness and my family's wealth for a prize to be won. I was never jealous of you. I was terrified for him." Arthur cleared his throat, bringing the focus back to the grim reality of the situation. "The prenuptial agreement is, as you know, quite clear," he said in a flat, businesslike tone. "Given the documented evidence of infidelity and financial deception, any attempt to contest it would be unwise. It would only result in this evidence becoming a matter of public record in a court proceeding, which I'm sure you'd prefer to avoid for Lily's sake." The mention of Lily was a masterstroke. It was the only card left that held any power, and Arthur had just neutralized it. Clarissa's face fell. The fight was gone. All that remained was the hollow shell of her ambition. "I'll have my lawyer contact you," she mumbled, pushing her chair back. She stood, pulling her jacket around herself as if suddenly cold. She didn't look at me again. She walked out of the dining room, out of the front door, and out of our lives. The quiet click of the door closing behind her was the most definitive sound I had ever heard. Arthur began gathering the documents, his movements precise and efficient. "She won't fight," he said quietly. "She has nothing to fight with. You did well, Maggie. You saved him from much worse." I nodded, but I felt no sense of victory. I only felt the profound weight of my son's pain, which was radiating down from the floor above. "Thank you, Arthur," I said, "for everything." He placed a comforting hand on my shoulder for a moment before letting himself out. I was alone in the silent house. I cleaned up the remnants of our phantom dinner party, my movements slow and automatic. Then I went upstairs and knocked softly on Robert's door. "Robert," I called gently, "it's me." There was a long pause, and then I heard his muffled voice. "Come in." He was sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at a photograph on his nightstand, the same one I had looked at on that first terrible night, the one of them smiling on the beach. His shoulders were slumped. He looked older, broken. I sat down beside him, not speaking, just being there. For a long time we sat in silence, the quiet bond between a mother and her child stretching to accommodate this new, immense grief. "I was so stupid," he finally whispered, his voice cracking. "All the signs were there, weren't they? The little things, the way she talked about money, the way she dismissed. Everything that mattered to you, to Dad, I saw it, I just didn't want to see it." You weren't stupid, Robert, I said softly, placing my hand on his back. You were in love, you chose to see the best in her. That's a reflection of your heart, not your intelligence. He finally looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a raw, agonizing pain. How long have you known Mom? I found out at the wedding, I told him, deciding that the whole truth was what he needed now. I told him about the garden, about the conversation I'd overheard. I told him about my call to Arthur, about the investigation. I laid my own deception bare. He listened, and when I was done, he didn't look angry. He just looked tired. He reached out and took my hand. You did it to protect me, he said. It wasn't a question. You went through all that, all those weeks of knowing, to protect me. And Lily, I added, always for you and Lily. A tear traced a path down his cheek. Thank you, he whispered. The days that followed were gray and heavy. The divorce was swift and silent. Clarissa's lawyer, seeing the mountain of evidence against her, advised her to take the settlement offered by the prenup and disappear quietly. She did. She moved to another state, taking with her nothing more than what the contract stipulated. Telling Lily was the hardest part. Robert and I sat her down together in the living room. Robert, with a strength I hadn't seen in him in years, explained it as gently as he could. He told her that sometimes parents realize they are better living apart, but that it didn't change how much they both loved her. He didn't poison her against her mother. He preserved her innocence as best he could. Lily cried as any child would, and we held her. She would see her mother on holidays, a detached and distant presence in her life. It was a wound that would heal slowly, but it was a clean wound, not a festering one born of a scandalous public battle. In the months that followed, our little family of three began to rebuild. Robert moved himself and Lily into my home temporarily, and the house, once so silent and heavy with secrets, began to fill with life again. I would wake up to the smell of Robert making pancakes, to the sound of Lily practicing her piano lessons. Robert threw himself into his work, but also into being a father. He took Lily to the park, he helped her with her homework, he taught her how to ride that simple, retro-style cruiser I had bought her for her 10th birthday, which she now adored. Slowly, I saw my son coming back to life. The blind naivety was gone, replaced by a more sober, more discerning wisdom. But his kindness, the core of who he was, remained intact. He was wounded, but not broken. My quiet war had been successful. I had not just saved his fortune, I had saved him. One evening, months later, Robert and I were sitting on the porch as the sun set, watching Lily chase fireflies in the yard. You know, Robert said, breaking a comfortable silence, I was looking at Dad's old maps the other day with Lily. I was telling her the stories behind them. I smiled. She has his sense of wonder. She does, he agreed. He turned to me, his expression serious. Mom, I don't think I ever really said it, what you did. It must have been the hardest thing in the world, to carry that secret, to protect me when I couldn't protect myself. You saved me. I reached out and took his hand. It was strong and steady. A mother's love is a powerful thing, Robert, I said. It's a quiet strength. It doesn't always need to roar. We sat together, watching the last of the light fade, a grandmother and her son, a family that had been tested by fire and had not been consumed. The foundations were strong. The house would stand. And that's my story. It's a story about betrayal, yes, but it's not really about revenge. Revenge is a hot, messy, fleeting thing. What I sought was something more lasting: protection, justice, and peace for the people I love. I learned that sometimes the most powerful weapon you have is not anger, but patience. It's the willingness to watch, to listen, and to wait for the right moment to act. The world may celebrate the loud, explosive battles, but there is a profound strength in quiet resolve. Love isn't always about grand gestures. Sometimes it's about waging a silent war to keep your family safe. Thank you for listening.